My guests this evening are some old friends, and I'll give you their names, and let's see if you can figure out why I've invited them. My guests are Ann Day Alexander and Scott Alexander. And maybe you've surmised by that picture we just flashed up there. Ann is the sister and Scott is the brother-in-law of Sandra Day O'Connor. We're going to talk about her initiation, swearing in, I guess is the right word. Everything about it. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We've got a little trouble here. This is our pre-program interview, and I've only got about 5 full pages of notes and stories that I'd like you to share with us. So let's begin. Why don't you tell us some of the things that happened when Sandra was nominated for the Supreme Court, the first woman ever to be nominated for the Supreme Court and then sworn in, and you went to Washington for all of this?
Well, shall we start with the
Sure.
nomination? Do you want to comment on the events?
It all came as quite a marvelous surprise. Sandra had met the Chief Justice and a number of the judicial leaders in the country the year before President Reagan was even nominated, by being part of an international judicial commission. And in June was just called out of the blue by the Attorney General of the United States and said,
"Hello, this is the Attorney General.
William French Smith, we'd like to talk with you." And Sandra said, well, I'm going to be back in Washington next week for a medical school qualification meeting. She served on a panel for the American Medical Association. And she called them when she got back, and they made an appointment to meet and just chat. She had dinner with the Attorney General and his wife in their little apartment. The next day, she had a meeting with some people from the White House, and she went back to her meeting at the Medical Association, and they called her out and they said, "We want you at the White House in 20 minutes. And we're sending a limo for you." And she was rushed to the White House and taken to the President's office. And there she was warmly greeted by President Reagan, and they had a marvelous interview, and that was the end of it. We knew nothing more of this until the President made his announcement.
Well, I'd like to add, we did talk with her over the phone the night before, and I guess by that time the word was out that she was on the, quote, short list, quote. So the night before, apparently the President had called her at 4 in the afternoon, and if I'm not mistaken, I just recall something. She was speaking on the phone at the time to Chief Justice Berger when the President's call came in, and she had to put him on hold to take the President's call. And anyway, that night we talked to her, and the President apparently had told her that at 4 that he was going to nominate her, but she did not let the cat out of the bag to us that night. She could only say, and as I look back now, I know there was a lot of excitement in her voice, but she said, "You might want to watch the television in the morning." But she didn't tell us that it had happened, and so at 8 o'clock, of course, the President was speaking on television.
What a
about
stinker.
The nomination.
Not
so
to
she
tell
kept
you.
the secret to herself.
Well, that's what they say about her, that she is.
But and I want to add, though, even before, during all the excitement that Scott was just talking about leading up to the nomination, she is the sort of person who just doesn't think about it. And if you tried to talk to her about it, she just would put it out of her mind. She kept going to the office every day at the appeals court where she was a judge, and would just not think about it. And she didn't get excited about it. She didn't let herself get excited about it.
We'll be back in a moment, and we'll hear more about Sandra Day O'Connor. Ann Day Alexander and Scott Alexander, sister and brother-in-law of our first woman justice on the United States Supreme Court, are my guests this evening. We left you about to go into Senate confirmation hearings in this story. What happened when it got to the Senate?
We drove Sandra's car back to Washington for her, and we got pulled into Washington on Labor Day. The next day, Sandra was busy preparing for the hearings. Ann and I went to the Senate and met with Senator Strom Thurmond's staff to get the lay of the land, as it were, and to go through the agenda. And on Wednesday, the hearings began.
Now, we've all heard Senator Strom Thurmond was very important to Sandra, but why?
Immensely. He's the epitome of a Southern gentleman, and a truly remarkable chap, I believe at age 78, and a very dynamic individual. And he just undertook, along with Senator DeConcini and Senator Goldwater, to oversee this entire nomination process. And he was a gracious host and a gracious chairman, and just a very nice fellow.
And as Scott said, was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I wanted to add Scott and I were trying to decide before the hearings took place whether we would go back for the hearings or the swearing in, not thinking at that time that we could manage both. And as it turned out, we took an entire month off and went back for both. And in retrospect, I wouldn't have missed the hearings for anything. They were just fascinating, and it renewed my faith in our democratic process, even though she was under grueling questions for 3 days. But it really did renew my faith in the way our democratic process works. And the swearing-in ceremony itself lasts about 10 minutes. So I learned a lot about our American government and the Constitution again by sitting in on the hearings. Wanted to make a comment. My first thought was the morning that Sandra was walked down in the Senate Judiciary room, and she was walked down the aisle, and the room was packed. There were standing room only. I mean, people were standing, and many people who couldn't get in, and she walked down the aisle on the arms of Senator Goldwater and Senator Thurmond, and it was almost like a bride being walked down the aisle, and people were peering around to see if they could see her, and that was what it seemed like to me.
While you were there, you were kind enough to bring along the guest list for a luncheon that Senator Thurmond and his wife threw for Sandra. And would you like to read us the guest list? This is just few people that sat around the table for lunch.
Well, at this particular luncheon, they had a luncheon for her every day, and Scott and I were included in 2 of those luncheons. Of course, Sandra and John, her husband, Senator and Mrs. Strom Thurmond, Senator and Mrs. Paul Laxalt, Senator Orrin Hatch, Senator Robert Dole, Senator Edward Kennedy. I know I sat next to Senator Kennedy that day, Senator and Mrs. Howard Metzenbaum, Senator Patrick Leahy, the Deputy Attorney General and Mrs. Edward Schmultz, Mr. Vinton D. Lyde, the O'Connor children, Scott, Brian, and Jay. Scott and I were there, and that was the list.
So what does one talk to Teddy Kennedy about over lunch?
Well, we talked about diets, and we talked about children mostly. And
just like
he was
any
very
other
personable, just like any other person. It was very, very friendly and very casual. And at that luncheon that particular day, Senator Thurmond had each of the senators stand up and say a little something about Sandra, and then Sandra wanted to say something after that and spoke, and then John spoke after that. So Sandra and John, John is Sandra's husband, my brother-in-law,
and also an
are
attorney.
like a Salt and Pepper Act. Yes, he is also an attorney when I say a Salt and Pepper Act, because Sandra, where one speaks, the other one speaks, and they really do it as a team.
John's one of the best stand-up comics you've ever seen in the amateur ranks.
Oh, really?
And he is always on cue.
And John is Sandra's biggest supporter, and Sandra is John's biggest fan. So they have an uncommonly good marriage, my dad.
And how many years has it been?
25.
And 3 sons that are all outstanding citizens.
They really are.
Great kids.
So, perfect proof that a woman who has a career does not necessarily need to neglect her children and have them grow up to be.
And Sandra had that ability too, Ellen, that she somehow could meld the career, the wife and mother, and her civic responsibilities flawlessly. And she has to be a role model for younger women who have those desires to be a perfect wife and mother as well as have their own career.
We'll be back in a moment with more stories about Sandra Day O'Connor. My guests are Ann Day Alexander and Scott Alexander, her husband. They are the sister and the brother-in-law of our first woman Supreme Court Justice. And I want to ask you a little question here. Now, I've known you, Scotty, for maybe 20 years, and we should say that you served in the Arizona Senate for many years, served us very well. And you're a new friend, Ann, but now how did you two meet?
It was contrived.
And who was the contriver?
Well, I was the contrivee, and the contriver was Senator Sandra Day O'Connor, and I was single in those days. And she said to me on several occasions, "You've got to meet my younger sister. She's smaller than I am and a lot cuter than I am." And I said, "Sandra, everybody wants me to either meet their sister or their ex-wife." And so, it was just sort of put aside on the burner. One day we were walking into the Appropriations Committee for a totally boring agenda that we couldn't do anything about anyway. And I said, "Sandra, let's go play tennis." And she said, "Great idea. Let's go."
So you mean she's human, too?
Yeah, she said, "Meet me at my house in 30 minutes. She said, "John's out of town. I don't have to cook dinner tonight." I said, "Well, it'll take me a little bit longer than that, but I'll be there as soon as I can." She said, "Well, you hurry because we're running out of time." Time is very precious in her life. So she runs into her office and she calls Ann and she says, "Ann, be at my house in 30 minutes. Ann says, "I'm not through at school and I have a date tonight." Sandra said, "Forget it, you be there." So when I got there in
She's
30
very
minutes,
persuasive.
there was Ann.
The two of us were there. So Sandra has,
And she
I
said,
might
"Funny
add,
that my sister just dropped in."
No, she didn't either.
What'd she say?
No, she just said, "Scott, I want you to meet my sister Ann."
so I might finish the story that that was, I don't even know what night it was right before
Monday night.
Easter. And Scott and I really hit it off, and we dated every night after that until we were married in June, as a matter of fact. And the next day, Sandra and John left on a ski trip because it was Easter. And when they came back a week later, after having introduced us that night before they left, we announced to them that we were engaged. So that was a big
We were
surprise.
engaged in a week and married within 30 days.
Might just comment about my sister Sandra that she has arranged a few other marriages and has done very well at it. They've all been highly successful. And she arranged some, and then when she became a judge, she was able to marry them also.
Same
But,
time. Scott, you were sharing with me another story from the Senate when you and Sandra worked on the not the sex laws, but the laws of Arizona to make them sex neuter.
Well, it was Sandra's idea, and I was privileged to serve on the committee that she had for an interim committee one summer.
And at
But
this
we-
point, she held what rank in the Senate, the Arizona Senate?
She was the majority floor leader, or the majority floor leader elect of the Arizona State Senate. And it was her idea to go through and take each section of the Arizona State statutes, along with a committee of citizens and other legislators, in any way that there was any sexual discrimination in the verbiage of that statute, to change it. And it was a monumental bill, but with Sandra's leadership, we were able to get it passed through the House and Senate. We allowed Diane McCarthy, who was a freshman representative that next year, to carry it, but we guided it through, and so that was a big plus, I think, in Sandra's legislative history.
And that was in 1973?
Yes,
How long did it take you to go through all the laws?
We had a good bit of staff doing it for us, but we went through it a section at a time, and we would meet weekly and go through and review what the staff had done as far as their drafting was concerned.
But it's really dramatically changed the status of women in Arizona.
And I know that same thing is true for the women in New Mexico, that they also are one of I would say the few states. I bet there aren't more than 10 states in this country that have sex neutered their laws.
Well, part of President Reagan's program is to encourage this, and I think that with the new federalism as he has enunciated it in his recent State of the Union address, not only with regard to intergovernmental funding, but also these other intergovernmental programs. I think this will be part of the program, and through his leadership, we'll see a lot more states adopting that type of legislation.
Will you share with us the story about when you went to Washington before the swearing in, and Scott, you wanted to see a gentleman concerning your occupation?
Well, I'm with Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and I was doing some research for my company on the migrant labor program, and I attempted to arrange an appointment with a gentleman out in Rockville, Maryland, who's sort of a third-level bureaucrat, but he's heavily involved in the migrant labor program. Had a tough time getting through to him, like all of them. I'm sorry, he's in a meeting. You know, can we have him call you back
40 years from now.
So anyhow, I was off doing some errands.
But we were staying with Sandra and
You know,
John,
staying with Sandra and camping out in their
during
apartment.
the hearings.
In the Watergate apartment
Watergate
building.
apartment building.
And
I
believe
think
me,
a lot
we
of
were
people
camping out.
don't realize that the Watergate is really an apartment building
Yeah.
back there.
Anyhow, while I was gone, the call came in, and Sandra took it. When I came back, she said, well, you've got your appointment out in Rockville on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. Well, I drove out to Rockville, and I showed up in this chap's office, and the first thing he said to me was, he said, Mr. Alexander, he said, I had no intention of giving you an appointment. And he said, and I don't know who your secretary is, but she's without a doubt the most persuasive woman I've ever talked to, and if possible, I'd like to steal her. And I said, sir, this may come as a surprise to you, but the person you were talking to is Sandra Day O'Connor, the new nominee of the United States Supreme Court, and you have never seen such a wiped-out look on anybody's face in your life. It just blew him away.
We'll be back in a moment, and we will talk about Sandra and Ann's early days in ranches in Arizona and New Mexico. My guests this evening have been Ann Day O'Connor and Ann Day Alexander and Scott Alexander. We're going to spend this last segment talking about your early days on the ranch in New Mexico and Arizona. And why don't you tell us about this picture?
Well, Ellen, that picture was taken at our 100th anniversary celebration for our ranch, which was started by my grandfather in 1880. So a year ago, in September 1981, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of our ranch.
Which is the
Lazy Bee Ranch, and it borders the Arizona-New Mexico line. Half of the ranch is in Arizona and half of it's in New Mexico. And I've gone to school in both states, and we pay taxes in both states, and had our mailing address in Lawrenceburg for years. That is
Lawrenceburg,
a picture,
New Mexico.
New Mexico, the picture there is of Sandra, and that's me.
You.
And we were up on a platform, and we had quite a little program, and we had 700 people at the ranch that day for the celebration.
Best barbecue you've ever seen.
Good barbecue, Dutch oven biscuits, and we really had a good time. And that's where we've grown up, and that's really part of our lives and where our roots are.
And I asked you to bring these pictures along because I wanted the audience to know that our new U.S. Supreme Court Justice, our first woman justice, is a real Arizona New Mexican and came from the roots of the land in both of these states,
That's
as
right.
well as yourself.
My grandfather was fighting Indians off of that land when he started the ranch in 1880. That is my father there, who's in his 80s. He's 83, and the ranch is now run by my brother, but my father continues with the books and taking care of the accounting. And that's my mother right there, and she's 79.
I wonder if the camera can pan down on your mother's skirt a little bit and catch the prettiness of her skirt, because it's got the ranch. There you
The
go.
Lazy
Lazy
Bee.
Bees,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sandra had the skirt made for her at one point.
The Lazy Bee. Can you share with us some of your early ranch stories about your upbringing?
Well, I think Sandra, of course, is 8 years older than I am, so we really didn't grow up together that much. And we were both sent away to school Sandra loved the ranch, and the kinds of things that we did growing up on the ranch would be to swim in the stock tanks and do a lot of rounding up, a lot of horseback riding. Sandra went away to school in first grade as I did, and my brother, and I know that I almost flunked out of first grade because I used to dream of the ranch and wanting to be, I would daydream and want to be back on the ranch, but our parents felt that it would be better to go live with our grandmother and go to school in El Paso. But we just grew up with a strong, hard-working, good-humored family, and I have nothing but the fondest memories of the ranch. And you didn't do things because they were impressive, and it wasn't a matter of seeking wealth or things like that, but it was a matter of getting the job done and just working side by side and fixing the windmills or fixing the fence. And I don't think people may realize perhaps that ranching is really hard work, and it's just one problem after another. And I think to a lot of people it's more glamorous, and they don't realize the droughts that you go through and all the disasters that happen, and it's really a matter of surviving.
Were your mother and your grandmother strong women?
They were. Ellen, my grandmother, was called the Iron Lady, I think, at times, and she certainly was a survivor. I know I've heard stories of her coming across the mountains in a covered wagon. My mother was definitely a survivor. She also graduated from the University of Arizona in 1925, back when not many women were getting degrees then. And living at the ranch at that time was very hard because they didn't have running water, and my mother had to haul water up from the well, and they had no indoor plumbing, and so my mother was certainly a survivor. But my parents tried to see that we gained knowledge of other societies, or the cultural, were exposed to cultural things. We took a lot of trips. My family was very trip-oriented. We took wonderful trips to Alaska, and I remember we went to Cuba, and Sandra was along on these trips. I was about 13 at the time. She was about 18, and my mother read to us constantly when we were little.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I want to thank you both for coming and sharing your...
It's been fun.
It sure has. We've been talking with Scott and Ann Alexander about their sister, Sandra Day O'Connor, our Supreme Court Justice. Thank you for joining me this evening on Talk It Over.